Hello and welcome to Policy Watch, your packed snapshot of the week's biggest business stories, their context, their relevance and impact. I'm Govindraj, Ethiraj. The results are out now, but just a day before the election results were announced in Maharashtra and Haryana, the centre cleared two big-ticket economic decisions. The first one was to deregulate retail diesel prices, and the second one was to approve new prices for domestically produced natural gas. The government's decision to free diesel prices from government control came after softening of global crude prices that are at present around 80 to 85 US dollars a barrel. It will also allow players like Reliance Industries and SR in the private space to re-enter the retail market. The second decision to fix new prices for natural gas are based on the net calorific value of gas at $5.61 per million British thermal units. It's also 75% less than the increased proposed by the Dr. Rangarajan's formula. The new prices will, however, not benefit Reliance Industries that operates the gas blocks KGD1, D3 and KGDWN 98-3. The company's alleged production shortfall is pending arbitration, which means it will continue to get the old price of $4.2. The price difference will be maintained in a separate account to be paid after the dispute is decided. Another important decision taken by the CCA last week was approving the changes in direct benefit transfer scheme started by the previous UPA government. This modification will allow consumers to receive their LPG gas cylinder subsidies directly in bank accounts. And joining me to discuss this are DK Joshi, Chief Economist at CRISIL, and also Brinda Jagirdar, former Chief Economist at State Bank of India. Thank you very much for joining us. So, DK, let me begin with you. What's your sense? I mean, we've obviously are very keen to tackle the subsidy problem head on, and we're taking a whole set of steps. What is this adding up to, and is it really significant in the nature, given the nature of the challenge that remains ahead?
Well, I think you have to make a beginning, and I think beginning has been made, I would say. And you need to curb the total amount of subsidy. Everybody talks of reducing the subsidy bill, and also you need to target it better. The moment you target it better, there are huge amount of savings. Let me give you the example of kerosene, for instance. If you manage to target better, or it reaches the people who need it, I think right now there is about 40% mistargeting. It is being siphoned off for adulteration, etc. Then you not only save on the subsidy bill, but also save on I mean, the excise duty that would have been paid on kerosene, I think, is getting siphoned off. So I think there are multiple benefits that come out of targeting it better. And I think right now the measures that government is taking, the use of technology for identification, etc., will help in better targeting, and I think will eventually reduce the subsidy bill, and there will be greater bang for the buck.
Right, and we are looking at a modified distribution scheme wherein 54 districts will be targeted, a modified DBT for LPG, 54 districts from mid-November, and the rest of the country from Jan 1st. So let me put the other question to you, Brinda. You know, one way to, of course, address the problem is to say we target more effectively and more efficiently and so on. The other is to say remove the subsidies. We've done that in diesel. Can we take this forward?
You know, there are two kinds of subsidies, I would say. One is an enabling subsidy that helps increase productivity, that helps increase GDP. Another is enfeebling subsidy, which increases the dependence on the state, and it's absolutely not productive. So I think we need to make a clear distinction between these two types of subsidies. And of course, I would agree with what DK said about better targeting. So it is this is what is important. And as a World Bank study has also shown, 50% of all subsidies in India go to the top 40% income earners. Right. So clearly there is a big mismatch here, and we need to address this.
So when you say enfeebling and enabling, how would you split that in
So for example, if you want to increase say renewables, in solar power for example, and you're giving you're subsidizing that. So I think that is an enabling subsidy. But if you are going to fertilizer, for example, that's a very clear example of an enfeebling subsidy where you increase just dependence and without any addition. And perhaps a little bit of Narega also could be to that extent. It's being tweaked now, and I think that's a good thing, because that will help to increase assets, productive assets in the economy. And that's what I think every subsidy should aim to do.
Right. So we'll come to targeting in a moment, DK. But if you look at the larger issue of subsidies themselves, considering that we've now deregulated diesel, are there other examples that we can look at similarly?
Well, I think you will have to taper off, but I think some subsidy is inevitable in this country. I think with so many people below the poverty line, they need support. I think so. You basically have to ensure that it reaches them. So I would say that but whatever is being wasted, is being ill-targeted, I think that needs to be got rid of. And LPG and kerosene are the next two items where I think there is a lot of mistargeting. I think government should make it very focused, and it should reach the intended beneficiary.
So which was the tougher one? Diesel happened in some ways automatically because prices went down internationally, and we actually started seeing oil companies sitting with positive recoveries.
Well, absolutely. I think this was an opportunity provided by lower global prices, and I think you use that fruitfully. I mean, if the global prices were rising and then you deregulate, you'll see the implications for inflation, and you'll see a greater restlessness because of higher prices. Now, I think kerosene and diesel and LPG are going to take a lot of time. I think these could be done very quickly. They might take years to get rid of it, of the subsidy element, and I think so that has to begin. Maybe something like what was done in diesel, slowly increasing the kerosene prices on a gradual monthly basis, which is not felt. I think maybe that can be initiated because the subsidy quantum is quite large in both.
Right. So, Brinda, how critical is the kerosene component in terms of the value? And secondly, how important is it to fix or plug the loopholes within kerosene so as to send a larger message that we can manage to ourselves, that we can manage our subsidies better?
Clearly, because kerosene is more widely used and it's highly subsidized. So it's very important to first plug that big hole so that you can get the economics from it, the benefits from that, and you can use it elsewhere. Now, another subsidy that we didn't talk about is food subsidy. Food is very important, there's no doubt about it. Food for the poor is extremely important, there's absolutely no doubt. But we have not seen how we can increase our production and productivity. For example, China, with the same amount of arable land, produces close to 400 million tons of food grains, and we are stuck at 250, 260 million tons. So this is what we need to increase rather than just look at subsidy. For example, the subsidy bill has definitely gone up. Subsidies as a percentage of GDP has gone up for something like from less than 1% in 1980 to close to about 2.5 to 2.8% now. So subsidy has gone up, but at the same time, capital expenditure as a percentage of GDP, that has gone down sharply. So we are really not spending on the right things, which is going to increase GDP and which is going to increase the pie. I think that's where we need to focus.
Okay, so DK, is the bottom-up approach to fixing subsidies better, which is step by step, shave off something here, something there, or a much larger big bang approach from the top?
I don't think you can have a big bang in subsidies. I think that will be highly destabilizing. And even for food, which Brinda was mentioning, I think if you want to target 67%, I mean, you want to make food subsidy available to 67% of the population, I think that's not right. I mean, you can look at the people below the poverty line, at least give it to them.
So which comes back to the issue of selecting,
absolutely. I think targeting, and also I think using technology to properly identify and disburse. I think that would be critical. So I think subsidy is a big issue, and it is they are here to stay, but we have how do we get more bang for the buck is critical.
So yeah, and that's really my next question. So thematically, what's the sort of the new way or the forward-looking way to handle subsidy, which we can either learn from somewhere else or we can evolve our own systems?
I think it is the cash transfer. I mean, what we have is a PDS system. I mean, where I think you are storing the grain, wasting the grain, and then again, a lot of inefficiencies that come with that. I think if you simply make the transfer of subsidy to the poor man's account, and I think that if you identify him properly, you've sorted out this mess that happens in between the procurement to the ultimate dispersal. There's a lot of inefficiency in the system that will get completely wiped out. So I think the Latin American experience tells us that the direct transfers to poor are a much better way
and that's indeed what this government is following too. I mean, with more vigor.
Yeah, I think, and using technology as well. I mean, which is the Aadhaar-based platform, etc. I think though there were some bottlenecks there, but I think though they need to be addressed. But I think that will make it more effective.
Brinda?
I completely agree. Cash transfers is really the way to go, and they've made a good beginning. But more than this, now, for example, India is one nation, but still not one market. So we need to have a mobility of goods and services all across the nation, and for that, I think changes in the APMC Act is going to be very helpful. And also let the private sector move into procurement and storage through cold storage chains, logistic chains. So that is what will help bring that. Otherwise, the government will still end up procuring more and more food grains, not being able to store it, not being able to transport it.
So that's what I'm trying to arrive at. So if you were to take us a few steps back and say, okay, here is this is India. There are 270 million people below poverty line. We have to take care of them either through food subsidy or fuel subsidy, and yet we want to maintain a clean balance sheet. what is the way to do it? I mean, and, you know, for instance, is the way you're suggesting the better way to do it? I mean, you know, or should it be, you know, keep picking up each piece and then trying to address their problems and so on?
You know, to begin with, it would be, you look at it, look at each of the pieces separately, because it's difficult in a country like India, which is so diverse and where there are such large numbers. It would be difficult to go for a big bang across the board kind of subsidy reduction.
Even if there's no reduction, do you get a sense that there is thinking of a more unified sort?
Definitely there is thinking of a more unified sort. That is why it's being addressed in bits. I mean, the thought is there. It's a holistic policy. Only the steps are different, and it has to be different sectors.
Yeah, let me bring in a Chinese saying, I mean, which is you give a man fish to eat, you feed him for a day. You teach him how to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. So I think you eventually have to create lifetime livelihood opportunities so that people don't depend on these subsidies. But as a in between, I think you have to wean off these subsidies. So you have to push that thing of providing livelihoods to people up, which manufacturing, etc., will be critical. At the same time, you wean down the subsidies. So I think then you have a situation which is...
So that's the even larger picture.
Yeah, larger,
okay, even as I wean off the subsidies, let me create opportunities.
Absolutely,
so that people
absolutely.
So are you getting a sense that that's happening?
I think that's
really the fundamental issue.
The Make in India kind of thing is moved towards that, but I think that's a very big challenge, and I think it's if not insurmountable, it's going to require a huge amount of follow through and creation of infrastructure, better enabling environment. I think there are many things that need to be done for pushing the livelihood opportunities in a sustainable manner. Not created by the government.
Last word,
Brinda. I would just add the ease of doing business that is being done, and some changes in labor reforms. So all this is part of the big picture.
Okay, so the big picture is that we should obviously have subsidies for certain sections of the population, but we also ensure that we create opportunities, so we create balance between the haves and the have-nots.
And we're never going to do away with subsidies in a country like India.
We're not saying that.
Yes.
Yeah, right. So we need to take a break here, but we come back on the other side. We'll talk about the new e-auctions for coal. That's it on Policy Watch. Stay with us. Welcome back here with Policy Watch. On Tuesday, the President approved an ordinance that will allow the government to auction coal blocks online for private companies. The move is seen as a big step in reforming the energy sector. It affects 214 coal blocks that the Supreme Court had quashed. The government also clarified that the proceeds of the auction will go to the states where these blocks are located, and the entire process will be completed in 3 to 4 months. The problem in some ways seems to be the original ownership, which is of the coal blocks with the government, and then all the resultant problems about transparent ways of auctioning the resources. How do we fix that problem?
Well, I think that's a long way, but right now I think for the coal sector we need to debottleneck that constraint. I mean, this is one of the key constraints to growth in the economy right now, and it's something which is a low-hanging fruit also, in some sense, that if you fix that, you are benefiting the power sector, you are benefiting the steel sector, you are benefiting the cement sector. So the brick and mortar sector, which is now very sluggish for the last 2 to 3 years, will immediately benefit out of this. Right. And then if the mining activity picks up, then you have commercial vehicles, etc. also that activity also picking up. So I think first is to debottleneck, get it off the ground, and then I think the privatization issue, etc., that is to improve efficiency, etc., that will be slow. Right. I think they have talked about commercialization, commercial use of mines, but I think to say that it's going to lead to denationalization, I think it would be a leap of faith.
And there are concerns. I mean, the unions are protesting and so on. So but Brinda, let me come to the larger question here. Is this so this is a step, but it's not the full step. So should we be looking at a full step, which is to look at how we can denationalize it, or should we be trying to find ways of working within this framework?
Let me answer that in 2 parts. One is that in the last 10 years, power capacity has more than doubled. But today we still have 30,000 megawatts of power capacity lying idle because of lack of fuel linkage. So coal, and again, very surprisingly, I mean, or rather I would say it's unfortunate, we have the 3rd or 4th largest reserves of coal in the world, and we are not even able to mine that, and we are not able to transport that, and not just shortage of coal, but shortage of turbines, generators, transport, engine wagons, railway wagons. So it's all these things together that are causing the problem of in the coal sector. Now, you talked about denationalization. The very word evokes a lot of emotion. But let me just come to the banking sector, for instance. In 1991, when we first started, the word used was deregulation, and at that time also there was a lot of apprehension, and there was a lot of fear that perhaps the public sector banks would be edged out, and they really have a role to play. But look at the situation today. Banks are in much better position than they were 30 years ago, and we could withstand the global crisis because of our inherent strengths after following after the
but there you had the creation of a private sector to which the public sector also responded admirably.
In fact, the public sector improved its efficiency and technology came in, and look at the sea change it has brought in the banking sector.
But can the same thing happen in coal or a resource based industry?
It can. Okay. It can happen. Open it up. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I think it'll bring in competition. I think it'll bring in professionalism, and so the slack in the system will get reduced. And I think it's pretty well understood that these things yield discernible benefits. I mean, and I think first you need to, so I would say that first debottleneck it and then start working towards its efficiency improvement in that segment, which will eventually lead to denationalization.
Right. So we have an ordinance, at least the captive guys in steel, cement and power will benefit from this.
Right.
The others we can come to later. What are the other areas in the economy that we could be addressing in this manner?
For debottlenecking.
For debottlenecking, for freeing up, for allowing private entry if there is a need.
We need, let me just take on this question of power itself, mining itself. Now, here we need to improve our technology. Before I come to other sectors, in this sector, what can we do? In the 1960s, Australia was really fearful of, it was wanting to ban export of iron ore because they thought that their total resources are something like 400 million, and those would get depleted. But today what is the situation? They've been exploiting this in a very scientific way and in a very environmental friendly way also. So today Australia is actually exporting more than 500-600 million tons of iron ore, and its total reserves have gone to something like 64 billion. So that's what we need to do. We have the resources, and instead of quick fixes, let's look at use technology, as DK was saying, use technology and try to get the best, the most efficient way of mining what we have.
Okay, so mining is one. Other sectors, is there any thoughts?
I would say manufacturing.
Okay.
We need to really free up. Now, this e-business portal, for example, now that's a very good thing. But here, the government is going to put 25 laws by the center and 35 laws by the state, put them onto on one portal. But do you really think we need 60 laws or 60 clearances for one certificate for starting ventures? China, for example, I'm told that all they give you is a 2-page clearance, and that's it. No more looking for any licenses or clearances.
So if you were to take a holistic picture here, so we are saying that okay, it's not about just denationalizing or privatizing something, but it's also about saying how can we make the whole environment more conducive to doing business. DK?
Yeah, I think as far as Brinda was talking about the manufacturing sector, I think again there are two issues. One is the
because this is manufacturing in some way.
Absolutely. I think one is the regulatory aspect, which is ease of doing business, fewer clearances required. I think those kind of things. The second is the physical infrastructure aspect. I think sector like manufacturing cannot progress without physical infrastructure. You need good roads, you need reliable power supply, you need good ports. Only then you can become competitive and maybe take up the space which is now being vacated in some segments by China. Otherwise, I think just by improving regulation, manufacturing, it will only debottleneck a part of it. But I think there are larger issues, so I think you need to fix all these issues. I think only then it will.
Let me add one more to what DK said. Social infrastructure. So we have the physical infrastructure. We need to fix that, of course. But also we need people. We need skills. We need education. So I think that's also.
Yeah. So we'll come back to that in a moment. So the other question I have is, when we are talking about an e-auction system like this, is this system sufficient and transparent enough to keep everyone happy and happy and at least give them the feeling that things are being done in a certain manner?
Certainly, I think that's a very good step. But we also need a regulator in the coal sector. So we don't have that in the.
So an e-auction system does not necessarily fix the original problem. Is that then? That's my question.
I mean, it does to a large extent because there is it's very clear who you're giving it to. You're giving to sectors which require it: steel, cement, and other sectors which require this resource. So in that sense, you're actually channeling this for the best of the country to use the resources in the best possible way. So it's a good beginning, and I think it's moving in the right direction. But like I also said, we need a regulator in the coal sector.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely, and also ensure that
are all auctions good?
Well, I think auctioning is one way of price discovery, and I think if done properly, it is an efficient way of price discovery, and it has been tested several times. I think I think e-auction would bring in another layer of transparency to that. So I think it's something worth exploring, particularly in this segment. But I think while we do this, mining is a dirty word. I mean, I think So we need to make sure that it's done in an environmentally friendly way. It's not plundering that goes on. I think that is where the regulator would come in. But it should not be so debilitating that the activity itself gets stalled. So I think a mix of right kind of regulation, right kind of environmental policies, it can always be done in an environmental friendly way. As she was pointing out, in Australia, I think those people are trying to do it in a much better way. So I think we need to take some of those lessons on board.
For the larger resource and mineral resource, so more privatization or more private participation or less? What's your sense?
I think you will have to involve the private sector, but I think you need to, when the private sector comes in, you have to make sure that it's regulated well. I mean, I think there's no...
And you think that in some ways is the problem of the past?
I think, the regulation is still evolving in India, whether it is for the power electricity regulator or any regulator. I think it's in an evolution phase, and I think we need to make it more efficient, I would say so.
Brinda, I know you talked about bank privatization, but in this case, minerals and resources, more privatization or less?
Yes, we need to have, we need technology, and we need the latest, and in fact not just from domestic players. I think we should have it, we should even allow the foreign players to come in who will bring with them something that they have used in their countries and bring more technology, more efficiency. So it should be opened up to more players, both domestic and foreign.
Okay, and what are the checks or safeguards that we should be having in place if we were to open the sectors up completely?
Yes, we need to know who is using it, where it is going, and is it related to the business they are in? Do they have the right, are they from the right industry to exploit this in the best possible way? Is it environmentally friendly? So we need to have a few checks and balances. It's not as if you're just going to give it away to them. We need to see that they're doing it right.
And therefore you've also pointed out another lacuna with the earlier system, wherein maybe people who had no experience in that space were actually buying up licenses, including with telecom spectrum. DK?
Yeah, I would agree. I think broadly with that I think the regulatory framework needs to be in place. I think once you design the regulation, then you need a regulator who can implement that independently. I think the independence of the regulator also becomes critical here.
Okay. So what are we looking at in future? So if we are saying that we are more private participation, more efficient way of monitoring it, either through a regulator or not, can then the government take a back step or a step back in some ways, or does it need to be involved as a player too in this system?
I think the government has already said very clearly, government's business is not to be in business. So what the government should do is really create that enabling environment and let the animal spirits take over, so that you're able to, competition will get the best for the GDP for the country, as well as the best players will come in, best technology. So I think we really
and last point on this, so the proceeds are going to go to the states, is what the government is saying.
I think that's a very positive,
right?
Because I think it will give states incentive, I think, to encourage this activity, because many of the things are in the domain of the states. So I think if the revenue is coming to them, there's already issue of GST robbing some states of their revenues, and they're being
and it's been suggested that this is one precursor to
absolutely. I think if more of these things happen and states have more autonomy and more power, I think that's very good, because that will ensure a very healthy competition among states.
Right. You need to take them on board. That's true. I totally agree.
Okay. So and if you see this as being a precursor to a more sort of happy GST regime?
Yes, I do. It does look like, that at least there is more give and take, there is more understanding of one another's position, and I think this seems to be coming.
Right. So let me come to the larger economic question now. So if in 3 or 4 months we are going to see more coal being mined and more power plants getting their due, and steel and cement, what's the kind of impact you see on your numbers that you projected?
Well, I think for this year, I think it will not be very positive, because these things take time. I think it will take time before before the manufacturing actually surges ahead. But I think from a medium-term perspective, from next fiscal onwards, I think it can lead to a surge in particularly manufacturing growth.
And a surge beyond what we projected earlier?
Yeah, I think
we're still 6.5.
I think we have an average of 6.5 for the next 5 years. I think that can exceed. It will depend on with what speed these things surge ahead. I think, and we are also talking of a sustainable growth where inflation is low. And I think if you have an outcome of 6.5% GDP growth and 6% inflation, that's much better than 8% GDP growth and 10% inflation, which leads to an unsustainable situation.
Right. And Brinda, do you have a take on what the numbers could be like, the GDP numbers? If
6.5 for the next year is fine, but my own sense is that it will pick up much faster thereafter. Okay. And let's also not forget that globally there are very few spots where investors can really invest and expect to get good returns, and India is. And DK is just back from a series of meetings at the IMF World Bank, and you were telling me that basically things are looking a little, of concern. The rest of the world.
I think when the year began, the things were much better. If you look at the IMF recent outlook that has come out, more countries' growth has been downgraded than upgraded. Right. I think India is one of the countries where the growth has been upgraded, and US is the second country. Apart from that, I think all other parts of the world are in some sort of a slowdown mode, and more risks are concentrated in the Eurozone. And there, I think there is a fear of a triple dip recession also. Right. So I think
the external economy sector is not likely to save us, therefore more imperative that we fix these problems.
Well, I think first of all we went down because of a domestic issue, so if you fix them up, we'll come up.
We'll come back. Great, that's a good note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us. That's all we have time for on Policy Watch this week. We'll be back next week, same time. Thanks for watching.